Yeah, she's talked to Gil Lusk, and they've talked to quite a few people. And but anyway, they asked me where they should stay and everything. They're going to try and get a helicopter and fly the area. And they've talked to people about getting permission to go in there and going ahead.
Could lose it all by next week. You know, we're on borrowed time already, but you never know. Might work.
I met Chuck in 1962 up in North Fork in Flathead, Moose Creek, I think it was. He was tagging black bear then. And I did have in contact with Chuck till about 7 or 8 years ago. But I was back East flying airplanes, and I saw
The weekly thing, Bear Talk. Bear Talk.
Okay, here we go. You ready?
Anytime you want to criticize.
Good evening. Welcome to Naturally Speaking, a special program tonight entitled Bear Talk. I'm Michael Marsolek, and before I introduce our honored guests, I'll say that this is a live program being broadcast right from the studios here at Missoula Community Access Television, and somewhere approaching the bottom of the hour, we'll be opening up for your phone calls, and we'll do that after a little bit. We've got all sorts of things to talk about, primarily about bears and grizzly bears in general. Our guests tonight are Dr. Charles Jonkel, director of the URSID Research Center, and Walt Derby, grizzly bear photographer and videographer. Welcome. Well, we've got, Chuck, you brought quite a bit of slides, and maybe we could start right off the bat by going to some of the slides that we have with us, and we can continue to talk as we look at some of those. First of all, where were these pictures taken? Were these mostly in Montana, or were they around other parts?
A lot of these are from Alaska, McNeil River and some other places. But what I like about this series of slides is they show a lot about the bears, and I think some of the things that make people so attracted to bears. They show the bears working, making a living, and doing things that people relate to very nicely. This first slide, I think, is a real good example. This is three cubs, and they're watching the water. Why are they watching the water? Well, their mom's out there fishing, and so dinner's coming. Plus, you'll notice in the series of slides, the young are very, very attentive. They're good students, and of course their mothers are good teachers, and a lot of their survival depends on what they learn from their mother. There's a lot of knowledge passed down from generation to generation in the bear species, just like in the human species. It's another way that we relate to them so strongly, and why we're so interested in what bears are doing and how they make their living and such. This slide is just the young ones. Here's another young one doing the same thing. That human-like stance, too. We relate to that. We can see the anxiety and the interest of the animal. I use this series with kids a lot, and I talk about, okay, look how these bears are listening to their teacher, which is their mother. And it really seems to turn kids on to the idea of how much they are like us and we're like them.
Well, people are fascinated by bears. You know, we are in a very lucky place here in western Montana that we are in one of the only places in the lower 48 states, with the only place in the lower 48 states really with grizzly bears in this part of the country, and people are always fascinated. I think maybe we need to talk too and about the impact of people on the bears and all of those factors that are so involved.
Well, look at Walt. I don't know. I must have known Walt pretty close to 20 years now, and it's because of his extreme fascination with bears. It just been an obsession for many years.
I came out here 30 years ago because of the grizz. And I run into people at the park, and that's what makes their day, their trip, if they see a grizzly. And that's, you hear talk about grizzly all over the park. It's, well, pretty mountains, but grizzly. Did you see that grizzly up there? Was he still up there? And,
Now, here's another example of what I was just talking about. The cubs are there, real close to Mom, learning from her. There's also a lot going on here that people should know, and I think like to know. Notice the two bears closest to water. That's a dominant female, and she's at her fishing hole. And the other bears recognize her dominance. The mom and the two cubs behind her, they want to fish there too, but they're not going to move up and fish until the first female and her young are out of there. And the way they tell one another that is the behavior. See there, look at those bears in the back. They're all looking down at the ground, looking away from the other bears. And what they're telling them with that posture is, hey, we're not going to come up there. In fact, we don't even know there's any other bears around. We don't see you. We're just sitting over here passing the time. And that prevents fighting between them. Fighting is costly. They need to be fishing. And so they have this social hierarchy, and they're very explicit in how they communicate with one another, which again is part of the fascination that people have with bears. And a good example of the kinds of things we should know about bears if we're going to be in bear country.
What is the status of the bears in this part of the country as far as population, as far as what areas that they're primarily in? Obviously, we all know Glacier Park and even Yellowstone, but you know, what other areas and what is the current status of the grizzly bear population and its listing as far as, you know, endangered species and things like that?
Well, their status has actually improved some with the passage of the Endangered Species Act, and then the grizzly being listed under that act as a threatened species. That has given them a lot of protection. It's brought a lot of management and research focus on the bears that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And this is, I think, what's turned the situation around for the bears. Agencies are now spending a lot more money on the bears than they used to. The public is a lot more accepting of good bear management and good bear research. And they're a very costly animal to keep, and the cost is in the research costs, which is very expensive, and of course the management costs. And who's going to pay for it? Well, you have to have a public that cares and wants their money spent for that sort of thing. And I think the Endangered Species Act certainly triggered that. But the great interest in bears and work like, you know, people like Walt documenting bears and making information available has amplified the interest of people in bears, and thereby their willingness to pay for bears. As the human species increases in number, it's causing less and less habitat for the bears. We're so much like them behaviorally, in our food needs and our space needs, that we're constantly threatening them with our increased numbers. And as their habitat gets more and more crowded and pinched, the cost in maintaining them goes up and up and up. So we're going to have to like them more in the future if we're going to keep them, because the cost will continue to go up in terms of keeping them, simply because it'll be a lot tougher job when there's less habitat and there's more people going into bear habitat in more ways. Well, then you have to work harder at the management and the research is what it comes down to.
So where's tell me a little bit about where the population centers are of the bears in western Montana, and you know, how much have we encroached upon that habitat?
Well,
they were lowland animals, you know, hundreds of years ago when this continent was first, before this continent was settled, were they not? And they have been forced into the higher elevations. And
that's right. Their main areas were the big mountain valleys, and even way out on the Great Plains. And they were very abundant throughout the whole western half of North America, and that's all gone now. And that goes back to your previous question, what's their status? It's gone down, down, down over the years, and it has improved in recent years because of this greater interest by the public. A curious thing about the grizzly, though, is they're part of the brown bear species of the world, and the brown bears and the wolves were the two most widely distributed land mammals in the world. They literally were throughout the northern hemisphere, all across North America and all across Europe and Asia, even down into Africa and places like that. I say were, but in fact they probably still are the two most widely distributed species in the world. There still were wolves all across the Eurasian landmass and all across North American in big areas, and same with the brown bears. So you can say, well, why are we worried about the brown bears? Well, the grizzly is in a different status. The grizzly is a type of brown bear, and especially south of Canada. That's the one we're worrying about the most. We aren't about to lose the brown bears, as you can tell from these pictures. There's some places there's lots of brown bears. These are grizzlies on McNeil River in Alaska, and they're just all busy fishing there. And you can see the result of the social hierarchy here, where the bears can be quite close to one another without having fights. Each bear there has an understanding with the other bears around it, and they all know the rules. They're very strict rules. And again, it's a similarity with people. They have all of their social laws and social codes just like we do, and they're very polite about them. They're very strict about them, and the bears understand them, and we should too if we're going to be around bears.
There's a lot of misconceptions about the grizzly bears too, though. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of those? And people have these, varying ideas. Some very incorrect.
Well, I think one is that they expect to see a grizzly killing things if they see one. If he's not ripping something up or, got his nose curled or whatever, teeth showing, they think he's a good bear, and they think, well, I can walk over and approach him, and any time that I've seen a grizzly and people were able to get closer to him, they did, invariably. And a lot of people, I say the bear is an awful forgiving animal, and I believe that he is compared to his reputation. It takes an awful lot for a bear to really do something, and then you hear about it. That doesn't mean you should, be real lax. That's probably the biggest danger, is becoming so lax around him that you think that he's going to be safe and nothing is going to happen, and then it can. I've seen him go from standing completely still, you think, boy, it'd be nice to be close to get a picture, to go full gear, just like that. And they can also spring like a mongoose. They can be sitting right here, and they can be over at that wall just like that, just.
They can move and speed up incredibly fast. Another real misconception about the grizzly is that people look at those big, long claws. They have claws up to 4 inches long. And of course, they look like knives, and they look like they'd be great for tearing your insides out. But actually, what the claws are for is digging. Grizzly bears make most of their living on vegetation, and a good lot of the vegetation that they go after are roots, tubers, corms, and such. So I like to call those claws garden tools. It's what they really are. They use them a great deal to get their food, and also to stir up the soil, beat out the competing plants that aren't good food, and they plant their own species of plants in the process of digging, and they literally do a lot of gardening with those front feet.
One thing that's really interesting, and that's the eye-claw coordination. I've seen them where they just have tremendous coordination. Another thing, the range of power. I've seen them just rip the ground up, just tear it up, and then just start skimming the top, just so gently skimming the very top. So they have a big range of power and good coordination.
This whole thing of bears and people, I think, is very fascinating. And it's not just people, primal peoples. Primal peoples had a tough time with the bears. The bears were really big, and they didn't have very good weapons, and the bears wanted the same food the people did. So they had a tough time in many parts of the northern hemisphere. And so they have a lot of cultural things and a lot of behavioral things towards the bear, and even religious things. Bears are built into the the religions of Celtic and Nordic, but also Christian and Islamic religions. A lot of things about bears in religion of people. And but the curious thing to me is it's still around today. By my last count in Missoula, there's 28 different organizations, everything from businesses to clubs and such, named after the bear, which is a remarkable thing, I think, in a town the size of Missoula, to have so much focus on the bears. But I think we're doing it yet today because we too feel the great power of the bear, just like primal peoples felt the great power of the bear.
I was reading an article the other day about a fellow that feels that he can sense a grizz in his travels. He's backcountry in that he can feel one. And he's talked to other people about that. Some people seem to have that ability that they know when he was there. He has a presence, believe me.
Yeah, and if you think about, even in European times, there were big cities, pretty good sized cities, or big towns anyhow, when a lot of European history was being written. But there weren't roads, and it was quite a perilous journey to go from one European city to other. You were going through the forest and big trees and dark pathways and rocky mountain passes, and of course there were bears and wolves there. So even in recorded historical times, there's been some very powerful influences by these kinds of animals in interactions with the bears and people. And I kind of really fascinated myself, and I like the way we're still so fascinated with bears. And sometimes, we laugh at primal people, but we're doing the same thing ourselves, Why Grizzly Grocery? Why Grizzly Auto? Well, you sell more stuff that way, that's why. People know that, so that's why they do it.
Can you guys talk a little bit about what these bears need in terms of what it's going to take for their continued survival? And I think, maybe even in just terms of what they need just for their daily survival, habitat, food supply, and things such as that.
That's a real crunch, especially with the grizzly bear, because they need so much space, and in order to get enough food, they're big animals. So they need a lot of space to get adequate food. Then they also den for sometimes more than half a year, which means they have less than half a year to get their food. So food and eating is very important to them, and they need a lot of it. And then of course they're big animals, they use a lot, and then they have to get it stored for the winter. That means they have to have a good habitat, and that's where the crunch comes in. And they need so much area that if you're going to have grizzly bears, you have to keep very large areas fairly pristine. But there again, the people bear thing comes in handy, because when it boils down to it, good grizzly bear habitat is good people habitat. Take this picture here, all those bears, beautiful river, mountains in the background, but there's no condos up on that cliff. There's no bridge there. There's no walk along the river. There's not tea parlors and such back in the hills. There's not a shopping center back there. And this is what's different about Alaska, and that's why I like this series. Because the people aren't there, the bears can be there.
Now, the bears were, until man took over to dominate this part of all of the inhabited part of this part of the country. The bears were the dominant species, right? They were top of the food chain. We are the only things that infringe upon their rights as the dominant species. Isn't that right?
That's pretty true, and the only thing that was an enemy to grizzly really was another grizzly, and primal man. And I imagine it was harder for him to deal with a big grizzly than it was primal man. So, yeah, they were. I sometimes think of them as the primate of North America before people came here. They had it their way, and I think a lot of the behavior that causes us trouble today it goes back to that fact. I also sometimes think of us as the fourth bear in North America, the two-legged bear, and I use that comparison because we're so much like the bears, they're so much like us, and we need almost everything they need, and they need almost everything we need. So there's a lot of competition between the species, and it makes a real nice study because you can look at bears when you're really looking at people. You can be looking and thinking about bears, and sometimes it's easier to understand things and accept things about yourself because of that.
I like to think that people need more space to survive than a lot of countries in the world have. You know, the population per square mile. I like to think that people need more space, and they're certainly more at home in a place like Montana. Or I know I am, but
Well,
and you are.
I agree. I agree. I don't know what obsesses humanity, that we want more and more people. Life gets cheap when you have too many people, and it would seem to me we should want more and more grizzly bears, because that means there's going to be lots of nice people habitat out there. The way we're going now, you know, we're all going to be standing like that, touching 5 other people all day long. Is that what we want out of life, or do we want beautiful valleys and a chance to see grizzly bears fishing and things like that? You know, I don't understand what's going on in the collective minds of humanity. Seems like we're going out of our way to try to ruin our quality of life.
Well, people also, I think, have a misconception that, you know, the bears have enough habitat and that they're going to be just fine. I mean, what is your prognosis? I mean, it seems that we're really on a crash course with the fact that our people population continues to grow and continues to grow, and we keep cutting into the habitat that the bigger mammals need to survive: bears, wolves, lynx. I mean,
Well, the area where Walt's been working is a good example with the railroad and the highway.
Yeah, I noticed in North Fork, the Flathead, I met Chuck up there in 1962, and how that's all grown up with homes and cultivated pastures. One thing I noticed up at the grain spill up south of Glacier, I saw over 20 different bears there last year, and people looked down there and they said, now tell me that there's a shortage of bears. Look at all the bears down there. That's just a handful that congregate at a great food source. And
The thing about the habitat, they need big habitat, and this is where the crunch comes. A lot of animals can survive quite well with people in a small area habitat, or a small area wilderness, or fairly limited ranges. Bears, because they're so big and because they hibernate and they have to store a lot of food, need big areas, and that's where the rub comes between bears and people, especially the grizzly and people. There's that competition for space, and of course, as more and more people are born into the world, the less room there is for bears, and inevitably we're going to lose things like the bears if we continue on that trend.
I think, you know, I've seen bears go for what you might call a morning walk, which is a 5-mile walk, just a little jaunt, just in their, just a little recreation for them, rather than their whole habitat, you know, in the whole area that they actually inhabit. And they, you know, they can cover a lot of ground with a normal walk. I've seen them come off the top of a mountain, down, side hill down, go back up the top in half an hour more than I could cover in a day. And they don't look like they're moving. They're just going along their normal gait. Well, they go over rock where we'd have to go around it.
and they can really move when they want to. That's for sure.
Oh, just a big bear just walking and doing 6-8 miles an hour. You know, we'd be running to keep up with them. And of course, they have 4 legs, which makes it easier going uphill and downhill for them than it is for us.
Well, Walt, maybe we could talk a little bit more about some of the work that you've been doing in filming and working with the bears, especially up south of Glacier near Essex, where that grain spill was. Maybe you could just tell a little bit of that story, and we'll show a little of this video too.
Okay, well, I went up there my first time in 1989, and there were 3 spills over that winter, and there was a huge bunch of corn spilled, and it really was never cleaned up. In 5 years, 2 things have been done. A cosmetic electric fence was put up, covered a very small area, which did no good, and then last year the railroad finally cleaned up the spill, took 1,430 truckloads out. Now, right under those trees, right here, this here is a hole that I watched the bears dig in all summer. There was just no hole there at the end of the summer. They were down, a big bear could fit in the hole. I saw over 20 different bears there. And,
This is a nice shot of a bear, that's behind the tree, but, you know, you can say, well, boy, that's a nice photo opportunity, but the corn spill has been a real tragedy, and,
yeah.
it finally got cleaned up in 1993, but what's sad to me is that it got cleaned up 4.5 years late. There's probably been about 60 bears that either are dead because of the corn spill, or they're gonna have shorter lives. They're doomed because of bad behaviors they learned at the corn spill. And of course, if they could clean it up in '93, they could have cleaned it up 4 years earlier. And this is what makes me so angry about the whole thing, that if an individual would do something like that, you know, everybody and his brother in government would be down on your case. Because the railroad did it, they got away with it, literally. And have caused the premature deaths of maybe up to 60 bears. And a terrible tragedy. It cost them a lot to clean it up. And they did a good job of it, but why in God's name didn't they do it 4 years ago? That's what
Excuse me,
makes
Chuck, here, these bears almost got hit. There's a train coming. You can't get the full benefit, but you will see the train come, and it was close, a lot closer than it looked. It just hit the track, there's the train. They just got off the track. And I saw many close calls up there. I just happened to be able to catch this one.
Quite a few of the animals were actually hit by trains, and you know, in addition to all of the other things. I mean, it's obviously a real tragedy. This is just another example of you know, we're right in the middle of prime bear habitat there. We're running the rail line through, and unfortunately, a spill like that.
If you notice here, the bears just stay right there. That train's about 30 feet from them. And they just, most of the time, they just lay and look up at the train. And they were always, in this area here, almost always within 50, 60 feet of the tracks.
And see, a lot of these are females with cubs, and of course they have now taught their young to come to this site. And bears are real creatures of habit. They'll return to those sites even if there's no food there.
This male here was a bear that was killed on the highway a couple months later, about 100 yards from that exact spot.
Yeah, they're even carrying on their breeding activity right by a railroad track, which is bad for the bears. That tells you that they've learned bad habits, staying near people, staying near the highway.
This bear that we just saw, some people believe he's the one that was relocated last week, that 800-pound bear. I named him Goliath. I had names for all the bears.
So how much time did you actually spend there?
I spent about 3 months up there, total time. I had a camp about a half mile down, and
Why Walt's footage is so important is it was his footage really that made the railroad finally act. And Walt did it on his own, just through his passion for bears. Nobody asked him to. In fact, the Forest Service tried very hard to prevent him from documenting what was going on there. And they were supposed to be the lead agency in cleaning up the corn spill. And in fact, they constantly protected the Burlington Northern. And that's the reason Burlington Northern got away with it for 4 years. If Walt hadn't on his own gotten this footage and blown them out of the water on it, I don't think they would have cleaned it up in '93. We'd still have bears coming in there. And the females went young especially bad, because then you got a whole new generation that learned bad habits coming to that site. And they'll continue to come. That's why I say it may doom up to 60 bears over time, because there's going to be bears maybe 2 or 3 generations later who are going to be coming here because their great-grandmothers came to the corn spill. And they'll get hit by trucks or trains.
I think there's down the way there was a campground, a Forest Service campground, and in '89 these bears were a lot closer, hanging out a lot closer to that Devil's Creek campground. And they were going through the campground every night, and I really expected something to happen there. And I was talking to an employee of the Forest Service, and I said, would you like to see some videos of the bears going through this campground the other night? And she said, I'm sick of the spill, I'm sick of the bears, I'm sick of everything. And But I thought there'd be a problem there. They finally did close the campground for the rest of that year, and I think the next year.
Is this line also Amtrak line, or is it just
Yes.
Burlington Northern?
It's Amtrak also.
Amtrak is involved in it now too. Now, bears have always been coming to the rail line there, 'cause there's always been a little corn and other grain spill, and there's always been some sewage dumped. But what was bad about the corn spill is it got a lot of bears coming there, and Amtrak is involved in that they kind of constantly spread garbage along the track as they go through. And bears will come to an odor reward just as well as to a food reward. And this is where we think Amtrak really has to change its policy too. Now, the freights change their policy, and the railroads are not likely to have as many spills there and wrecks as they did, but Amtrak is continuing to contribute to the problem.
I heard today that the superintendent is highly concerned about the Amtrak. I didn't realize that, and apparently it is a big problem.
Well, I think the main thing that seems to be the greatest impact is probably the bad habits that have been learned, isn't it?
Yeah, and here again, where bears are like people, they almost have what we call in human societies an oral tradition. And with human beings, from listening to your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, your neighbors, passing on information, that's how, human society developed. And bears do a lot of that. They don't talk about it, but they watch, like you saw in those slides earlier, the cubs, just watching so intently what the moms are doing. And so they learn from their moms, who learn from their moms, and this is passed down who knows how many generations.
I think a problem too is the bears are habituated. I mean, a lot of times I was there was no one there. And then other times there'd be a bear jam, there might be a couple hundred people there. And the bears would walk right by him without no fear at all. I could tell if a new bear came in. He'd be real jittery and nervous. But most of them just took it in stride.
I want to tell you, you are tuned to Bear Talk. This is a live broadcast of Naturally Speaking. Our guests are Dr. Charles Jonkel, director of the Ursit Research Center, and Walt Derby, a grizzly bear photographer and videographer. And we're taking your calls live at 542-6228, 542-MCAT. We do have a caller standing by. Let's try to take the next call here. Caller, are you there?
Yes, I am.
And go ahead. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you gentlemen could address the implications of the Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act on grizzly bear habitat and what Pat Williams' proposed Montana Wilderness Bill would mean for grizzly bears.
Good question. We've got legislation being proposed right now, and what would that legislation do to grizzly bears?
Yeah, I could take a whack at that. Both the acts, I think, will help the bears because they both are creating more secure grizzly bear habitat. Obviously, the NREPA, or Northern Rockies Ecosystem Protection Act, would protect a lot more of bear habitat, and that's why I've been quite interested in that act. I call it bear wolf wilderness because what it would do would be create big wilderness. Well, we're always creating a little bit more wilderness here and there. Some wildernesses in some of the flatland states are really quite small, but they're great wildernesses, and I don't begrudge them that at all. We need that kind of wilderness. But if we're going to have things like grizzly bears and caribou and mountain lions and such, then we have to have big wilderness, and that's basically what NREPA is all about. It creates bigger blocks with corridors. If we're going to have species like this in the future, we've got to act now. And the easy way to see what's needed is you can do it yourself. It's what I call the 50-year test. What is western Montana going to look like in 50 years from now? Well, basically, I see one city like Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, Vancouver, and the West Coast. It's going to be a city literally from Whitefish to Derby, and Polson's going to be maybe 15,000, 20,000, Missoula maybe 180,000. Kalispell, 90,000, places like Sealy Lake, 5,000, 6,000. Do we have enough habitat to keep the grizzlies with that kind of people they're kind of numbers of people, and obviously we don't have now, and that's why we need to act now. If we want bears 50 or 100 years from now, we've got to act now, and that 50-year test, I think, shows you very clearly what we need to do.
Is it a matter with this legislation that's proposed of definitely setting aside areas other than, mountain peaks and small chunks? You mentioned corridors. It's obviously these areas of prime habitat, if isolated, don't do a whole lot of good either, right?
That's true, and the panda in China is a good example of what happens if you don't do that. The pandas are down to very few in numbers, and they're isolated in about, somewhere 7 to 9 different small populations. Each population then has to make it on its own. It's very much more difficult for a population to survive if it's low in numbers and limited in size, and it balkanizes their habitat, and that's a real danger for animals that need big areas. And NARIPA would do that with these corridors. This kind of habitat hasn't been protected adequately in the past. We've got a lot of nice mountain tops protected and such, but bears can't live in the mountain tops year-round any more than people can. They need to come down in the valleys, and they need to go from one mountain range to another. And we haven't provided for them that kind of habitat. And if we are going to, we probably better do it now, because 50 years from now, it's going to be impossible.
It'll be too late.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, caller?
Yes, it does. I was wondering also if what exactly the release language in the Pat Williams Wilderness Bill would mean for the grizzly bear. It seems like so much land is released, and some of that is prime grizzly bear habitat.
Well, the part of that I would worry about the most is that in that release we would lose these corridors. We would lose some of these lower elevational areas that the bears need to go to. And you're literally going to have more situations like the bears along the railroad. And they're nice bears, they're beautiful bears, but they're doomed bears because they're both coaxed and forced into marginal habitat like that. And they learn bad habits towards people, and eventually they get dead.
Sure. How about the drilling on the Badger 2 medicine? That seems to be a major corridor between the linkage of grizzlies in the Bob Marshall and Ian Glacier. And if the drilling started there, what would that mean for the grizzly bear?
Well, that's a different kind of a corridor. That's a north-south corridor, and the main value of that north-south corridor is it links bears in the Glacier-Waterton area to bears farther south. We've already got an isolated population down in Yellowstone, and if we get isolated populations in places like the Mission Mountains or some parts of the Bob Marshall or Scapegoat and such, it'll just be bad for the populations. And protecting the north-south corridors is just as important as protecting the corridors between mountain ranges. This has been a hard thing for the public and even the agencies to understand the need for those corridors, but people who know large mammals know that we've got to do that, and we've got to do it now. If we want the grizzly bear, and of course the Endangered Species Act says we will keep the grizzly bear, so we're bound by our own laws to do things like NARIPA too and get right down to it.
Okay, thank you very
caller.
much.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to call and participate, the number is 542-6228, 542-MCAT, and we are taking calls. This is a live program. We've got bear experts right here. We've been looking at footage of this Burlington Northern spill from a few years ago now. And Walt, did you want to add anything more about some of the footage that we've been looking at here?
This here just really sums up all the activity. There have been a lot more close calls than there have been deaths. I know a number of people have almost hit the bears on the highway. And some of the authorities were surprised when I told them that the bears were on the road around. They didn't really apparently realize that. They weren't just up on the tracks, they were on the road, in the stream, around some of the buildings, houses there, down the way.
See, they get used to people, they get used to the odors from the trains, and then there's, of course, a lot of traffic on Highway 2. People park there, and all this adds to deteriorating their natural behaviors. There's been bears that have come from as far as 50 miles away and come to the corn spill, and then they got some bad behaviors. They take that back with them, and so if you look at that, you know, the corn spill was really quite a small area, but the population that it impacted is about 50 miles in diameter.
There was no fighting there. There was just so much food. They all got along really well. And I feel that some of these bears were so habituated that you could have walked right up to them if you were stupid enough to do it. I don't think it would have bothered them at all.
And that's not a good kind of bear to have right in Glacier Park and right along the highway. And still, we let it happen, and that's to me that's very sad. Under some situations, like up at McNeil, people they have places where people can do that sort of thing. There too, it causes a habituation, but there, what the state is trying to do is literally have people and bears interact as one species. People have to understand the bear's behavior, and the bears very quickly understand people's behavior, and they have a respect towards the photographers, same way that the fishing bears that we looked earlier, where the one family group wasn't messing with the other family group, and that's exactly what goes on between bears and people. I think there's a good lesson in that. There's a lot for us to learn in that. There's also some endangers, though, when it's not explained properly. If you just put a picture like the one here into magazine, don't tell what's going on and how it's controlled and how people are taught and the real dangers that you can have in a different situation, then that's a bad picture. If you explain it and show what the relationship is between the bears and the people, then it's a good picture. So it's how it's used, too, is very important.
You know, keeping a clean camp isn't everything. You don't put your camp in the center of a grizzly population. One day I was watching this female with her two cubs. She was on the tape, and 3/10 of a mile down the road, there's a little pull-off area and a little waterfall in there, and there's a fellow on a motorcycle in an ultralight tent. And she was 3/10 of a mile from him, and she's walking that way. She had crossed there that day before. So I stopped and I talked to the guy, and I said, I have no authority, but I thought I'd let you know that you're right in the center of a lot of grizzly bears. And I said, there's a female and there are two cubs coming down this way. And he said, well, I don't have any food. And I said, well, it's not really a matter of any food. It's just that she crossed here yesterday, and she's coming down this way right now. And he said, where should I go? And I suggested another place. So anyway, I went back to my camp. I came back an hour later. He was still camped there. And the next morning, early in the morning, I saw him packing up, and there was no way. There's no way I'd want to walk down that highway at times, let alone be camped right there. But it's more than just, you got to use common sense too, besides keeping a clean camp and that.
These things that go on between bears and people are very, very powerful, and we have to understand more about it and be more understanding. The bears understand people and relate to them better than people relate to the bears. Even though we have lectures and slideshows and videos and everything, the bears learn it quicker than the people do. It's really quite amazing how good they are at behavior with people. This, of course, again, is in Alaska. It's not in Montana. Our bears are different. They don't see as many other bears. They don't have as many social skills. And so you really wouldn't want to do things that you can do with Alaskan fishing bears. Even though they're the same species, these bears around here are quite different behaviorally. And that's why it's so important to explain the difference when you're giving slides or publishing pictures and such. That a lot of time isn't done adequately and adds to the problem.
Explain what's going on in those different situations, because it could be misinterpreted.
That's right.
Let's take another call here. Good evening.
Hi, I had a question for Chuck. I've heard that grizzly bears are an indicator species for other animals and the general health of the ecosystem in general. Are there declining populations, the overall trend of their decline? Is that sort of a sign to us that we really need to pay attention to the issue and protect this species for the, general health of the ecosystem in general?
Well, I think grizzly is a very good indicator species. A lot of other species are too, things like wolverine, pine marten, and such. probably just as more so, but the thing that's different about the grizzly bear is that we are so interested in the grizzly bear. And of course they can hurt us, and we're more frightened of them. Basically what it boils down to, an indicator species is healthy for people. If you've got wolverines and caribou and grizzly bears around, you've got some really nice people habitat. And so we're automatically taking care of ourselves when we're taking care of things like the indicator species. That's the logic behind it. And I think the grizzly is really important.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you for calling. And we welcome your phone calls. We've got a little bit of time left. The number is 542-6228, 542-MCAT, and this is a live program, a special Naturally Speaking program entitled Bear Talk. And with me is Walt Derby. He's a grizzly bear photographer and videographer, and Dr. Charles Jonkel, director of the URSID Research Center. What do you guys think of this theme park attitude that seems to be coming into the grizzly bears, and maybe even some of the things that have been happening with I know a grizzly bear park of sorts has opened up near Yellowstone.
I'd like to say first a word about these two bears here.
Sure.
To me, this is one of the most powerful pictures of bears I've ever seen. People relate to that in all sorts of ways, visual ways, but all sorts of subliminal ways. What are the bears seeing? Why are they standing like people are standing? Why are they so intent? What's going on in their heads and such? I think the stance, the curiosity is very, very powerful. And to see wild bears out there doing their thing, we're spying at them. We're being voyeurs here. Here's these two young bears learning about the world. What are they learning, and how are they learning? What does it mean to them, and what will they pass on to their young in the ways that we do? I think that this is a real good example of this bear-people relationship. The zoo you're talking about, I prefer to call it a roadside zoo at West Yellowstone. I'm appalled that the state approved that. I'm appalled that the other agencies have gone along with the idea. I know there's been a lot of opposition in West Yellowstone and in the area, but it's happening, and it's very, very bad for the bears. I think it's bad for the people. Maybe it's good for the economy of a few people, but it'll be fairly minor. They're cloaking it in an educational experience. In fact, it's going to educate people, I think, the wrong way. People are going to be they're going to think they saw bears in Yellowstone Park. They'll forget that they saw them in a roadside zoo. And the way the zoo is set up, you can get pictures of yourself with bears immediately over your shoulder without showing the fence and without showing the moat and such. To me, any little educational aspects that they might gain through their programs are all going to be washed away just by the very, very harmful photos that will be taken there.
How many bears do they have in captivity, and what is the? I mean, this is obviously just an opportunity for the novelty effect of people going to the park area to see bears, and then you have the chance. I saw the bears, but in fact, the bears are in captivity. And what is the exact circumstances there?
Well,
do you know?
it's not. Yeah, it's not bear habitat. People will get the wrong impression of what bears need. They'll think they've seen a grizzly bear and they won't. They'll have seen a zoo bear. A zoo somewhere else I can live with, near cities and such where people have nothing else. But to have a zoo right next to a national park, to me, is absolutely obscene and falls in the category of poaching. The person who's going to make a lot of money is poaching bears just as sure as the guy who shoots a bear illegally, in my mind. I think it's a very vile crime towards the bear to allow that theme park and for the people to promote it as something good. It's not. This little bear is fun when I always tell people that this is a different kind of a grizzly bear that we call a flying grizzly. And, He goes up and down the river till he sees a fish and he pounces on it. That's a beautiful picture. Actually, of course, he's leaping on a salmon.
We do have time for a phone call or two. If you'd like to try to call us, we just have a few minutes left in tonight's program. And you want to talk a little bit more about bear and people interacting? You know, I think that it keeps coming back to that for me because
I had a unique experience up at Mini Glacier here in August. A friend of mine's co-producer of a movie for National Geographic. There was an adolescent bear there that was going down the river, and then people were stopping. You couldn't get back across the road to go up where he wanted to go, so they closed the highway, and the rangers let us stay in to take and film him. There's myself, Ron, and behind us some of the executive rangers. And anyway, the bear started coming up the bank, and the ranger said, "All right, you guys, he's coming up the bank, get your escape plan." Well, anyway, he did, and he ran down below us at 30 feet by us. But the whole deal, the tension, waiting for the bear to come, for a while we didn't know where he was at, and it was the bear, the photographers, and the rangers all separated in time and space, just an isolated group with the distance people watching, all right there. And the tension, at that moment, it was something that was really unique. And I felt we were all one. We were all part of that interaction there.
a fascinating opportunity.
It was, yes, it was.
Let's take another call here. Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, I'd like you folks to address the issue of the mandatory use of bear food containers in Glacier National Park and Yellowstone National Park. They do it in Denali, and it works quite well to minimize impacts between humans and bears. And I wonder why Glacier and Yellowstone don't do the same.
Well, they are doing it to a much more limited sense. The Mount Washburn area in Yellowstone is people, attention is called to that. They're told how to do it the time of the day, and they can go and park there and watch bears without really impacting the bears at all. They have a nice visual, long-distance view of the bears and can watch them for extended periods, right from the safety of their car and the secure area of the highway, which, just like at McNeil, the bears know that the two-legged bears are up there, and they don't come up there, and the two-legged bears stay in their cars. There's some attempts at starting this in Glacier, too, at some of the pullouts where the bears, especially in the spring, are quite visible from the pullouts up on avalanche chutes, and I think there's some great opportunities for that in Montana, and I would like to see I'd like to see the agency spend more time and money in developing that and teaching people how to do it in a safe way that doesn't impact the animals. There's some real opportunities in Montana for that.
It's a shame that up at the spill, there was one side of the road. If people would have stayed there, and they could have kept people, which it would have been impossible in a short-range thing to set it up. But I always feel that the more people that can see a bear, a grizzly, the more support the bear is going to have. And
Yeah, I love it when there's a visible grizzly out on an avalanche chute, and sometimes 40, 50 people at one of those avalanche chutes. Because you don't know who the people are. They're from Iowa, they're from Washington State, they're from Texas, they're from Europe. But they're all taking home a trophy, their own bear in their own mind. And this creates clients for bears and a lot of support for bears. And I love it when that happens. And I think Parks can and should do more of that. Learn how to do it. Alaska is no doubt leading the way, I think, for the world in how to do this. I think the state of Alaska has been very progressive in that. There are some dangers, there are some problems, but with research and testing and trying this and trying that, I think you can get quite a workable system.
Well, you have so many people in the park situations, especially millions of people traveling through, and all of the extra things that creates. You know, the refuse and all the campsites. You know, obviously are attracting bears. So there is a real fine balance, isn't there? Is there not that we have to maintain in those situations? You know, is there going to be a point where have to limit the number of people that go to the national parks even because of the impact? Who knows?
I was really impressed the way the park handled the people at Mini Glacier this year. Earlier in the year, with some black bears that were along the road, and then with the grizz. It was over 3 different days that I'd seen this big grizz there. And I think they really did a good job as far as letting people be exposed to see the bear, but yet they protected the bear, blocked it off so he could go where he wanted, and it was a real good thing.
It takes time to learn how to do those things, and certainly some research to know how to do it right. And I think personally, I would like to see both of the parks spend a lot more time in developing those techniques. I think it would be very beneficial for the bears in the long run. They'd have more clients. But you know, there's millions of people come to the parks in Montana, and a good percentage of those come because they might see a grizzly bear, where they couldn't in Colorado or whatever. So it's very important to the state's economy. In fact, I gave a talk called the $500,000 grizzly bear. And this is a visible grizzly bear that people might see. And I think that's about what they're worth to the economy of the state of Montana. I just wish more people would realize it, and people in the agencies would realize it.
The people that don't know I'm involved with bears that I'll meet, when they hear I'm from Montana, would you ever see any grizzly bears? Or if I've come down from the park, I was just up at Glacier, did you see any grizzly bears? It's not, did you see any goats or elk? Did you see any grizzlies? You know, I was through there in 1954 and we saw a big grizzly, you know, people will say. And people, that really makes their trip when they see that grizz. That's something that really stands out.
Well, didn't I hear something recently about proposals to cut back the number of full-time wildlife biologists in the park system, or something along those lines?
Well, it's unfortunately, all too often the cuts come from that, you know, the scientific staff and the people who are specialized. You know, there's a number of the national parks that have a very high need for bear specialists, and they don't have them. Denali in Alaska is a really good example. They've got a very explosive and delicate situation there with a lot of people mixed in with a lot of bears. And some years there's nobody in the whole park that has any training in dealing with bears and people, and especially the bears. And that's too bad, you know, because sooner or later then something bad happens, and then the bears get bad reputation for literally for something people did.
Well, you know, going back to what we talked about earlier about the misconceptions of the bears, I mean, while there is certainly a large fascination in people coming to the national parks and that to try to see the bears, there's also a real fear, and people have no idea, and they think that the bears are, you know, out there killing cattle all the time, and you know, really seriously threatening the lives of people all the time. And really, that people bear confrontations don't happen that often, and primarily because we are lucky enough to not have to venture into their habitat. Is that right?
Well, partly because the bears are so polite to us too. They, you know, by and large, bears understand us a lot better than we understand them, and which is kind of ridiculous when we got television and books and lectures and slideshows. But the bear has to know about the two-legged bear, because, you know, we're the super bear. We can hurt them very easily, and they're quite aware of it. So they try real hard to learn more about us and how to live with us.
The interesting thing on some of the close-up stuff, I've had bears walk by me. I would never approach them at this distance, but they walk by me, and people say, well, did they know you were there? And I said, well, yeah, but you know, their eyes never looked over. No eye contact by the bear at all. He just walked by just like I wasn't there.
Yeah, they pretend they don't see you, just like those bears were pretending they didn't see the other bears at McNeil.
Let's take another call. Good evening.
Yes, I have a question for Chuck. I was wondering, what effects do grazing have on grizzly bear habitat? And do grizzly bears actually kill cattle very much, and how do they affect the ranchers? I don't know much about the conflict, but I understand that it's a big issue in Montana.
Well, it is a big issue, but to a pretty good extent probably a false issue. Bears have a far worse reputation than they deserve. Most bears just almost total vegetarians, and bears as a species are, you know, they make their living on vegetation. Very few of them know how to hunt and kill ungulates, including cattle and sheep, which are pretty easy really for them to hunt and kill. And most bears just don't know how to do it and never learn their whole life. A bear that does learn can be very effective, of course, in killing cows and sheep, and so we don't want that to happen. But by and large, it's distorted, but you know, it's real even if it is distorted, and so we have to prevent it as much, you know, as possible. And and do something about it. The Great Bear Foundation will in fact compensate people who have livestock losses to kind of diffuse the situation. But most of the bears don't contribute that at all, and they never will. They're out looking for dandelions, not cows. And we ought to know that about them a bit more. It's quite crucial if we're going to keep them, that we understand that.
Thank you for calling.
Yes, I have another question.
We're just about out of time, so.
Okay, I know that bears are migratory to some extent. When do you encounter a problem bear, for example, for killing cattle or bothering somebody in the park or something? I understand a lot of times they're relocated either to heaven or elsewhere. Do the bears come back, and where are they relocated to?
Well, a lot of times there isn't a good place to relocate them, but they'll get moved. A lot of times they take the problem with them. We'd be far better to try to keep them right where they are and fix it.
Thanks to Charles Jonkel and Walt Derby. You've been tuned to Naturally Speaking, a special program on Bear Talk.